Hey folks, welcome to the third episode of the AI Agent series. I'm Karan, founder of Composio, and we have Jordan, who is founder of Vapi. I think everybody who has built voice agents knows what Vapi is, but for
Awesome.
folks who don't, Jordan, would you like to introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah. So I'm Jordan, one of the two founders of Vapi. Vapi helps developers, engineering teams, enterprises deploy generative voice agents in their products and in their services, like their customer service.
Awesome. And I mean, to start with, I would love to know like how your journey has been. I think from some online material, I got to know you started Superpowered and kind of transition to Vapi. Would love to know how like it all happened, the story behind it.
Yeah, it's a long one. So the abridged version is me and my co-founder. We met at the University of Waterloo studying software engineering, and in our third or fourth year, after a couple of internships, we decided we were going to start a startup, and we didn't really know what we were going to do exactly, but I knew I wanted to work with Nikhil because he's brilliant, and so we started by working on a friendship app that helps like people keep track of their friends and their birthdays and stuff like that. Didn't really go anywhere. It was beautifully engineered, but didn't have any actual users. And then after a while, we stumbled upon like this lecture platform idea for sorry, too busy serving developers now for years. But it was a platform that helps professors send lectures to their students. And we got into YC with this idea. It was us and like four other co-founders at the time. So it was like, a lot of voices in one room. Moving to San Francisco at the time, starting the YC batch, really stressful. Probably the hardest 4 to 6 months of my life getting that thing off the ground. And after a bunch of pivoting, we ended on this idea called Superpowered, which helped people join meetings really fast. That was not something that came for free in the COVID world. Nowadays, like you have calendar apps that help you join Zoom really quickly, like with notifications. We were the first ones to do notifications for meetings. And so we raised money on that. We spent years on that trying to find out, okay, how are we going to expand the surface area of this productivity tool enough to justify like $1 billion company? And after searching for a lot of time, pivoting to becoming an AI note taker after ChatGPT dropped, we couldn't find something that excited us, that grew fast enough for us after like 3-4 years. So we kind of burnt out on calendaring and productivity tools. So we pivoted. Me and Nikhil moved to San Francisco and kind of were like, okay, let's just go as hard as we fucking can and let's figure out what we can come up with. If not this like calendar idea, let's find something new. So we moved to SF. I left a relationship at the time. It was like a harder within the period of 2 weeks. My whole life kind of imploded, and we moved from Toronto to San Francisco. And so having no purpose at all, having no friends or no one to talk to at all, reeling from a breakup as well, I needed something to talk to. And so I built an AI therapist named Harmon to go on walks with every day for like 2 hours every day. So I spent 2 hours in the morning talking to my AI therapist, and then the rest of the day just like building my AI therapist, because that's what I do when I am depressed is code. And after a while, it got pretty good. To the point where it was personally somewhat helpful for me. We thought we were going to build an AI therapist. We were planning to go to like Stanford campuses and start handing out business cards with like AI therapist branding on them and stuff, like trying to get people to use it. And somewhere along the way, we were like, oh, maybe like as a developer platform, this actually makes a lot more sense. Because if we're going to be the best therapist in the world, we need to know a lot about therapy, and we need to also solve this conversation problem alongside the therapy problem. And so we decided, okay, fuck it. Let's just focus on becoming a developer platform. Let's look around and see if there's anyone else who also has this voice problem with latency, with conversational turn taking, with like scaling the system. And we found a few startups, like YC startups doing this. Yep. One in particular was Hyperbound. They were our first ever customer. We literally like built our stack like for them kind of. And they were doing AI sales roleplay. And so in the browser, they wanted to have these things that talk like people to train salespeople to do cold calls. And so we built with them for a little while, started to find some other startups, worked with like 6 to 8 startups for about 6 months or so, trying to figure out like where our platform ends and where their like platform begins, like how deep we should go into the application layer. Found that balance, and then we launched in March of this year.
Nice.
That's the whole journey.
Yeah, I think it's quite a bit of a journey. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, like, I mean, ranging through somewhere like of a co-founder conflict or kind of something like that, and
and
then
everything.
breakup and therapist. I mean, yeah, I think it's like a
I have
pretty.
unfortunately seen it all.
Yeah, I think my second question generally is like, what kind of like what learnings you had from your kind of past journey, but I can totally see that it's all visible. I mean, yeah, the platform seems really cool, by the way.
Mhm.
Would love to understand kind of going a bit into the technical kind of details. I'm pretty sure like latency and like I think accuracy in that small latency is very big for you.
Yes.
So what are some of the kind of key things that you kind of look after
Yeah.
in your tech?
Uh, for maybe the first like 6 months, it was all latency. Latency was the only thing that we really had to think about because we weren't really operating at scale. We were just operating at a smaller scale where, like, we weren't running into, I don't know, like concurrency bottlenecks or anything. It was just serving like one or two customers. Those one
Right.
or two customers just wanted it to respond quickly.
Makes
And
sense.
so, with the current state of generative models at the time, and even today, like for example, like OpenAI just responds sometimes within 2,000 milliseconds instead of 200. It just does that when there's more
Yeah.
traffic. And so we had to build all sorts of custom like latency balancers and like streaming implementations end to end and optimistic sort of generations and stuff. So that was kind of the start of it. Was like now you have these three pieces: transcription, large language model, text to speech model. How do we get it all working in a way that responds within like 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 milliseconds? Once we built all that, the next thing that people needed was like good APIs and tooling on top of that to build the features they wanted, like the right kind of abstraction. So like,
Right.
for example, like if we perform a tool call, like what endpoint should that hit? What authentication should it have on that endpoint? If it's 2,000 milliseconds delayed, what should it say when it's delayed? Should there be conditions on that
Oh.
message? Like there's all these like depths to how the conversation should be configured that we started building out. So they have this like tooling layer. And then we started thinking about like, okay, if enterprises really want to deploy this thing, they can't afford for a model to hallucinate, especially like an audio model, which can like scream. And so we're like, okay, well, what's the biggest risk causing hallucination? Well, it's like too much in the prompt. And so we started to invest in deterministic conversation flows and multi-assistants to break up like the prompts and that kind of thing. And so now like the bulk or a good chunk of our product value moving forward is going to be building out these like deterministic conversation flows and exposing that as a product that people can configure via the API. On top of that, obviously there's like infrastructure scaling to like tens of millions of calls and just making sure that all works with like 3 nines or ideally one day 4 nines. And then plugging into like telephony systems, WebRTC systems, like the SDKs end to end. So in your web app, for example, you just call like vapi.start and you have something that talks. If you have an enterprise telephony system, it should just be as easy as like plugging in another human leg. You should be able to plug in like a Vapi leg. And so that's the infrastructure that we also manage on top of like the audio. So
That's pretty cool. So just kind of touching base on, because I think at Composer we are doing a lot on the tool side.
Mhm.
So you mentioned like you also have a tooling layer, right? Where the
Yes.
kind of in the natural language, your probably user can invoke some kind of tool related things. So
Yes.
what are some of the challenges that you are seeing there?
Yeah. Right now in the platform, tool calls are invoked by the model. The model can hallucinate when to call the tool. The model can hallucinate the actual parameters that are available to it and the actual values to fill into each of those parameters. And so we actually ended up training our own like fine-tuned model to like validate function calls to ensure that they're correct, because like the model itself is not good enough.
Makes
And
sense.
so there's a bit of like a function call supervisor that's needed. And also, when more context is in the prompt, when more functions are provided or tools are provided to the assistant, they tend to hallucinate more. Especially smaller models tend to hallucinate more. For example, like we have an end call function that can actually like end the call. If you give that to 3.5, if you say anything confusing, it will just hang up the phone, which is like makes it a bad experience.
Right.
And so, yeah, that is definitely a consideration. And by breaking things up into multiple assistants or more deterministic conversation flows, you can get more deterministic tool calling output.
Got it. And you mentioned about like the deterministic agentic flows that you're working on. Is it similar to kind of LangGraph like abstraction, like a state machine?
Exactly. Yeah. Just like a state machine. It's kind of like one model is like having a conversation with a very restricted prompt, like collect first name, And then once that's completed and verified it's completed, we now move to the second state, which is now collect last name. And you don't include the fact that the patient has like an STD in that like first name block. So there should be no way in which it could hallucinate and tell that person's mom that very private information, right? And so that's been super critical as we approach more enterprise customers who like with 3.5 it was like 30% hallucination rate. 4 is like 10%. I'm sure GPT-7 will be like 3%, but like we just need it to be 0.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Makes sense. And so, very curious. Like you mentioned in the starting, I guess most of the use cases that your customer use it for are in the kind of customer support and sales domain. Is that correct?
I would say sales is not really a focus of ours. Customer support
Is
definitely.
the major.
I think sales is a bit of a trap because like you have a lot of people trying to do like high volume outbound dialing to like make sales and find leads and that kind of thing. I think it works in some industries like real
Right.
estate, for example. But eventually, I think January 1st of this year, they're starting to crack down on robocalls. So you
Oh,
can't
right.
actually like, I think someone told me it's like $1,000 per call or $5,000 per like unsolicited, not opted in
Ah,
robocall.
Okay.
And so
got
it's
it.
very quickly going to become not a sustainable business. But
Got
on the inbound side, and of course for like use cases like collections or something like that,
Right.
that's perfectly fine. And so customer support is definitely a big thing for us because so much of the world's call volume today just happens via customer support. There's like $500 billion going to like call centers specifically every year. And so as you can imagine, that whole $500 billion stack is going to at least 80% of it is going to collapse over the next like 5 to 10 years onto generative AI systems. And so our objective is to capture as much of that as possible.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And kind of, I think the use cases that you are getting in these kind of like, for example, let's take a particular example around customer support. So there, the use cases will be, I think, in these deterministic flows, you have to collect some information and fill some form type
Yeah.
thing. Is that correct?
Yeah, that happens a lot. I would say most of these, like in customer support, you have these like tier 1 considered actions that are performed by like lower level human agents that are just like very simple flows that then get escalated to like tier 2 or tier 3, depending on like the severity of the request. 80% of requests, don't fact check me on this, around 80% of requests are solved in the tier 1 domain. And so these more like transactional, like, oh, what's my balance? Oh, like I would like to book an appointment. Oh, like very simple transactional flows that can very easily be managed by LLMs.
Makes sense. And kind of makes sense. And that's where you use, like, I'm guessing these are kind of custom function call that your customers define on the platform.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the tricky part is like every enterprise, every customer, yes, like we can provide a lot of like tools out of the box, like using something like Composio, but there's a lot of people who just have these like very custom like internal APIs. And I would say like that's when you approach enterprise, like that is the majority of cases. It's like, oh, we have this really weird OAuth 2 like mechanism for hooking up this like appointment scheduling thing with our EHR system, right? And so that's when it gets a bit tricky and requires almost always like an engineering team on the other side.
Makes sense. And interesting. Yeah. And have you faced, I think, just kind of like going a bit deep there quickly, I think around tool use, have you faced any issues where kind of like you mentioned like hallucination is obviously kind of a higher thing, but like in some cases what we have seen at Composio is like because of the complexity of these tools, like sometimes kind of the agent is not able to perform these tools as well, like if they are very complex, like nested schemas.
And this is like the big problem with having a developer platform like ours that is so open and configurable is there are so many wrong configurations.
Right.
And so it's up to us to set reasonable defaults. But when it comes to things like tool calls, like if I have a 10-minute conversation with a customer of ours, I can get them something great. It's just not everybody can have a 10-minute conversation with me. And so it's kind of, that's a challenge for us right now is like, how do we make within the product it obvious like what the best practices are for tools? Should you fill one tool with like 1,000 parameters? No. Should you have like 10 tools that an assistant should have? Like, no, that can be condensed down to one tool, right? Like there are optimal ways to use them. And I think our job moving forward alongside other things in the product is like making that much simpler for people to understand.
Makes total sense. And I think from what I could hear, generally, I think there are a lot of elements, right? And like, so I think there's a element of customizability. I think your customers want to customize the workflow. Then there's like, obviously on the reliability kind of front, that your kind of responses should be very reliable and like latency. So like, which do you think is the most kind of priority for you, like providing that level of customization? Because when you go like when you provide that level of customization, there will be some failures because people will use it in a bad way. So
Mhm.
what is like your major priority right now?
I mean, both are like they're all non-starters. Like you need all of them in order to like have the thing work. Because like a customer will not ship to production if the tool fails like 10% of the time.
Right.
The customer also will not ship to production if they don't have the level of customization they need. And so it's kind of like the answer is like all of it. All of it is needed to get this stuff to production. The reliability, the flexibility, everything.
Makes sense. Makes
So
sense.
so the only solution is like we need to have things in the product to teach people how to do it right.
Makes total sense. And that's, yeah, I think that's the tricky part that always you have to kind of spend time with the customers to figure that out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Moving on to kind of some interesting side of things, like what are some of the interesting use cases? Like we all know customer support,
Yeah.
like collections, etc. Some of the interesting use cases that you were also surprised that like some of the developers have built using Vapi.
I mean, role play training was very surprising.
So,
Role play training.
oh,
Yeah.
makes
So I mean, there's people trying to do sales on our platform. There's people
Right.
trying to do customer support on our platform. There's people trying to train salespeople on our platform and trying to train customer service agents with fake customers on our platform as well. Or like creating, what do they call it when they send like spy buyers, when corporates send spy like buyers into like drugstores and stuff to like check if Rexall is actually has good customer service. We have some of those too. And so I mean, we see all sorts of stuff from startups building on our platform that is quite unique, and some things start to take off. Like obviously like real estate stuff has been popular. Collections has been popular. In the consumer space, AI girlfriends has been a popular and a weird one to see grow. But yeah, there's all sorts of cool
No,
use
I think
cases.
AI girlfriend, character.ai type use cases are always very
Yeah, for
interesting.
sure.
But
I mean, the thing is, I haven't seen any other like consumer use case really take off.
yeah, that's
At
the most
least,
popular one.
yeah, I think that's the only one that's like actually generating some kind of revenue. I think it's still like so early, but I think we're going to start to see a big shift in consumer because like what's it called? Advanced voice mode just dropped. Apple Intelligence is also around the corner. Gemini Live is also around the corner. These things are about to be deployed on like 4 billion devices worldwide, right? And so we're about to see this really big shift towards voice as the default interface for doing like 80% of the actions that we perform with technology. Because, I mean, if you can talk to something like it's a person, you will talk to something like it's a person.
Yeah.
I won't want to like trudge through like 4 different menus to like I'm kind of hungry right now. I don't want to open my DoorDash in the middle of this meal. I want it to already be ordered because I was talking about ordering it with you, and it goes like, yeah, done.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's the kind of experience people are going to expect from the world. And so, sorry, I went off on a tangent there. What was your question?
No, I think it was more around like some of the interesting use cases, but you answered
Yeah,
that pretty
and
well.
so
Yeah.
sorry to finish my point there. So all of a sudden, yeah, consumer is about to undergo this shift where they're all used to using voice everywhere, and so you're going to start to see a lot more opportunities in consumer over the next 6 to 12 months after that mass distribution happens via Apple and Google.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I think I remember that her movement of like
Yes.
OpenAI that
Yeah.
kind of like got exploded.
Yeah,
in
and I mean like
multiple sense.
the her moment was the precursor, and like talk to your parents. Like they don't know what the fuck is going on. Like even my friends who are just like not NSF, they have no idea what is about to drop. I show them advanced voice mode and they're like, what the fuck? And I'm like, yeah. It's here. But people just don't know yet. And
Yeah.
I think we given the bubble that we live in, both like you and I and SF and probably everyone listening to this that like they all know what this stuff is, but the masses don't yet. And so both there's going to be like distribution of this tech, so they're going to start knowing about it, and voice itself is going to make it much more accessible to the average person, because the average person is very confused by ChatGPT.
Right.
I would assume, right, on the best ways to use it. Voice is like really the natural unlock that makes it so that we don't have to change our behavior to unlock the tool, but instead with voice, like we just kind of behave as we do, and the model can infer like what we want. And so that's going to be a big shift.
Yeah, I think, and kind of somewhat underrated, but I think kind of probably like still like our parents' generation have been used to this kind of sense of typing, but it's relatively new, right? Like, I mean, the kind of sense of voice has been kind of predominant since eras. Like, I
Yeah,
mean,
and voice has like been absolute garbage. Like we have really overextended the technology that existed pre like Transformers. Like think about Siri, right? Up until this point, think about that shitty thing in your car that if you hold down the wrong button for too long, like starts asking you for an address, and you're like, shut the fuck up. Like that is our impression of voice so far. And so of course everybody is extremely underestimating what the impact is going to be when it actually drops.
got it. No, that kind of makes sense. We discussed on the consumer front that there's a big kind of opportunity coming as like these
It's
kind
just
of
not here yet. And
yeah.
so I don't know when the right time to start a company is, because if you're too early, then you'll just like burn out before the actual moment comes.
Makes
So
sense. Yeah.
yeah, you gotta time that big Apple Intelligence wave.
Yeah.
Well,
But I think because you are kind of so close to kind of people building around this domain, because like a lot of our listeners will be like people just starting up, probably any kind of areas or kind of domains that you are thinking like both in like consumer front
yep,
and then probably you can answer on enterprise front where
yeah.
some of these voice agents are really more kind of like coming up, maybe very applicable where you're seeing like good demand.
Yeah, totally. There's two ways I would think about this. There is like existing call volume in the world, and there's like non-consumption or like calls like that couldn't have existed before. So in the existing call volume in the world, literally just look up like how many calls happen in the U.S. every year. Now break that down by vertical. Healthcare is like the largest, and so there's a lot of opportunities in healthcare. Prior authorizations, appointment scheduling, test follow-ups. Like there's like a billion things, and the entire industry runs on the phone.
Makes
So,
sense.
and of course, like banking and travel and like all these other verticals. So there are, I think, infinite opportunities anywhere that call volume exists. It just a product just needs to be built and then distributed
Yeah.
in those verticals. So those are very clear. The stuff that is less clear, but there is like going to be very large opportunity is like I mentioned role play training, right? Like who knew that would be a thing that people would want to use this stuff for? It wasn't feasible before to do role play training at scale because you would need to pay human agents to like help role play train, and like that would just be super hard and
Yep.
super expensive. And so now like it is actually something feasible. And so I think there's all going to be all these like, or therapy, right, is another use case that before wasn't feasible to do at $5 an hour.
Yep.
Now maybe it is, right? And so there are those opportunities. It's still very early. So if you want a safer bet, just start providing value where there's currently value to be captured.
So in essence, like kind of go for the call volume, figure out where it is.
That is the easiest thing, is like, because if you go for the call volume, you already have a customer.
Right.
It's like a car dealership. Yeah, okay, we're going to do AI phone calls for car dealerships.
Makes
Easy peasy.
sense.
Now it's just like how to actually sell to car dealerships. How do you get them as customers? How do you acquire more? How do you continue building a better product for them? And that's just like being a founder. And so that's why I think in any vertical, there are definitely opportunities, because a platform like us, living at the developer layer, we live there for a reason, because it's too hard for us to solve every vertical. So either we pick a vertical, or we just provide all the tooling for other people to dominate each vertical. Just the product in each category is going to look very different. And so we just can't hope to build like an application layer product here. But there's so much value to be captured if you just compare with the human labor cost that is going to answering these calls.
Makes sense. And I think on that front, very quick question: do you think like kind of the natural, like I think there was a whole kind of study, right? Like I mean. The human latency of response is like it's considered natural if it's like under 200 millisecond or 300. I don't remember the exact number,
I think
but
it's 320.
320. And
Yeah.
like I think kind of with a good LLM like GPT-4 being used, streaming and everything, what are the latency numbers that you are getting approximately?
Honestly, so with a full stack, you're looking at like 100 to 300 for transcription. If you're using like a 4.0 and pick the right deployment at the right time, you're looking at 400 milliseconds there. And then text to speech nowadays is like 300 milliseconds. So end to end. I don't know, you're looking at under a second. But then the phone lines, Twilio, whatever it might be, will add an additional 600 milliseconds. And then
Right.
there is like a bit of delay that you want to add to make sure users done their statement
Right.
before interrupting them. So you add another 200. So you're looking at around 1600 milliseconds on the average end. This is actually good enough. People think that they want 200 milliseconds. They actually don't. It's actually perfectly fine, and we have like equivalent conversion at like 1600 milliseconds to human agents. Because if someone has an objective, they just want to achieve that objective. And so when it comes to like enterprise use cases, they don't necessarily need something that's like 100% human. They just need something that does the job. We are though trending towards a world where latency is going to start coming for free with new speech-to-speech models and new architectures, especially real-time speech-to-speech models like the Moshi model that kind of does bidirectional like audio streaming in and out of the model. That's going to create the opportunity for very fluid like turn taking back and forth because you don't need a separate model and silence to know when to speak. It just the model has been trained to know when to actually speak based on like the user's statement. And so, I mean, the average is 320, but it actually is an average between like 800 and negative like 800 or something like that. Is how they arrive at 320. So in reality, humans are overlapping each other all the time.
Makes sense.
And so for you to have a completely fluid generative conversation, you need something that is like actively thinking while you're speaking and able to jump in. Like as we're talking, you want like make sense, right? That's like a back channel cue. Those sort of things need to also be done by the model for us to achieve like 100% human performance. But again, I think these are more like when you think about business application, like we're already there in terms of the tech. We just need to be like to do the steps in order. When it comes to the consumer applications, I think there is a lot of value to more human model architectures. It's just like it's been held back by the current state of the models.
Got it. Like any kind of do you have any kind of timeline in mind? Like I know it's very difficult. It's a crystal ball game, but generally like the way things are progressing, I think it's kind of like every 3 months we are getting something mind-boggling.
Yeah, I mean, I would say every 3 months we do see from each of the individual players, whether it's like transcription or LLM or text-to-speech, we see some sort of advancement across either latency, cost, or some new model that improves in human performance. Other than that, there is like these longer like step function shifts in the actual architecture. So as I mentioned, there's a cascaded model, transcription, LLM, text-to-speech. Soon we will be in a real-time API kind of world, like OpenAI, where you pass in audio in real time and it produces audio in real time. But that still has a separate model determining when to initiate like a generation and actually respond. So that model actually does not itself know when to speak and when not to speak. It's just given audio input, producing audio output. That model, I would say, is going to be ready for enterprise maybe in like 4 months. I think it's still very early, still very beta, and we're yet to see any enterprise customer not on Vapi deploy using the real-time API. I would say the coming months for sure. When it comes to the next architecture, which is like bidirectional streaming in and out of the model, it's still very early. Like the Moshi model is really, I think, the only open source model I've seen really pull something off, and it's like kind of garbage. And it's like a GPT-2 right now. And so I think they raised like a ridiculous amount of money, that lab, like 300 million or something. So I'm sure they can train something kind of cool. But OpenAI decided to make the bet not on that real time in and out architecture, probably because like businesses don't really need that yet. They just kind of need something that is that second stage, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. So kind of with the current state and like where you think probably with the real time more kind of WebSocket streaming type of thing, what are some of the challenges that you kind of see right now and that you foresee, both technical and like kind of business wise in building these voice AI applications?
Like with the real time API?
With the real time API, with this like right now, what people are using. So
like what are the biggest challenge is just determinism, as I talked about before, like guaranteeing that a model will do this then that, if this then that, but still sounding generative. Like there's a balance that needs to be struck between these two things. And as we approach like a speech-to-speech model world, there's even more indeterminism in these models because we could supervise text in and text out in real time and make sure it doesn't speak, right? But when it comes to audio in and audio out, there's even less control, even more variability and indeterminism. So we're still even yet to know how much less deterministic these speech-to-speech models are
Got it.
in comparison with their text counterparts.
Yeah, but isn't it even harder to like put guardrails,
Yes,
remove
because
hallucination?
it can scream.
Yeah,
Technically, it can like imitate the user's accent and offend them, right?
yeah,
And there's nothing really stopping that because you need to respond in real time.
yeah,
And so this is just a general constraint of working in real time is like you don't have 300 milliseconds to validate this tool call
yeah.
or to check the output before it comes out to make sure it doesn't, I don't know, tell them they have a disease that they don't have or something. Like those guardrails don't exist in low latency
Right.
constraints.
So
And so as as the models get faster, as chips also get faster, hopefully like we can shove more processing into time, like what we saw with the O1 model. But
right.
as it stands, like the O1 model, it's taking like 20, 30 seconds of crunch time to give a response. Like that, on every conversation turn, that's just infeasible.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So, kind of like what is happening right now as well. In some places, like there will be some kind of output from this real-time model, and there will be a much smaller model will just do validation much faster.
Yeah, like kind of separate things. I mean, we currently don't even have that. Like we
Yeah.
have something for function calling, but not. It's just too slow for us to be checking. And the thing is, if the model gets smaller, it's also going to get worse at like being able to detect these these breaches in the guardrails. So yeah, we're not even there yet. The main priority for us is like making it so we can limit the amount of context in the model on each step, so it's just more focused. That'll
Right.
get us like 95% of the way there. That last 5% is actually catching mistakes in real time and then making it hold its tongue.
Makes sense. I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think we have all seen kind of GPTs of the world
Yeah,
for
like
like
go off the
outputting
rails and
garbage.
offer someone like a free Ford Mustang, right?
Yeah. So I think, yeah, kind of around the close of the podcast, but want to understand, like, I think, like I'm building Composio, I'm kind of always like in this world we are in right now. Every 3 months, actually 3 months is also a very big window. Every month something kind of changing, like the whole path changing or path breaking happens.
Mm-hmm.
How you kind of like going about it? How did you take, for example, real-time API launch?
Yeah.
Like how? Yeah,
So yeah, so the models you could just assume like everything is going to be moving crazy fast. So I would make a bet that they're going to get better. I wouldn't make a bet on competing with them. I wouldn't make a bet on the current tech too heavily. That's why we have built our architecture so like modular, so that as a new model comes out within tomorrow, we can just plug it in and it just works. Same goes with the real-time API. When we plug it in, it just works. The opportunity for startups in this space, I think, exists where the world moves slower, which is enterprise. In enterprise, things don't really change that much. And
makes
so
sense.
if you build like an application layer product or some sort of product that is adopted by enterprise, you can at least be safe for a couple of years, building like whatever the current product is. Obviously, over time, you want to deepen the value that you
Right.
provide to these enterprises, but you can be sure that their processes are not going to change as significantly as the model architectures on the other end, right? And so that's where I would say. And when it comes to like tool calling APIs, for example, like one of the hardest problems that we have is integration and deploy time with our customers. And so it's like, well, we're kind of depending on their team to build out these internal APIs to bridge us into their internal APIs, and like that takes time. If only there was like some sort of tooling, and we have tried to get multiple friends to start a startup doing this. If only there was some sort of tooling that helped bridge tools to internal enterprise systems, maybe auto discover those internal APIs, like help them build those bridges, host those things for them so they don't have to spin up microservices for it. Like that, I think would go a long way.
Yeah, I think we are like planning some things around
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I think so. Probably like very soon, we can handle some of your effort
Yeah.
on that front. Yeah, I think one interesting surprise question that I ask all my guests is, given the world we are in, what do you foresee like 5 years down the line? What will be the state of like
Yeah.
voice agents, AI agents, like humanity in general? Because things are moving very fast.
Yeah, I mean, our thesis and my thesis is that voice will be ubiquitous and it will be everywhere. This is like, it has to happen. forbidding like a global war, forgiving AGI, like AGI, having a fast takeoff and then everything explodes. I do know that within a 5-year timeline with 100% certainty, voice will be everywhere. Be on our devices, it'll be on our microwaves, it'll be in our websites, it'll be like just the default way that we interact with the world. So that will look different. In general, this whole like ubiquitous computing, I think, or whatever they call that, ambient computing will just be like more of a thing. Things and agents like working for us in the background with that interface. Majority being voice, I think. Like long-running O1 processes that ping us every once in a while.
Yeah, notify you when things are ready.
Yeah.
Not have to wait on that chat window forever.
Yeah, but I don't think it will ever really be ubiquitous or take off until a big mover with a lot of distribution, like Apple, actually distributes it. That will mark the actual shift. And so that's why we've been waiting for Apple Intelligence to come out now for almost like a year and a half.
Makes sense.
Because like that will actually change consumer behavior. Some like niche AI website, .ai, whatever, is not actually going to shift the majority of human behavior, at least as it stands right now. So I'm waiting for that to happen.
Oh, I think looking forward to that future for sure.
Cool.
Where can our audience, the folks listening, find you and Vapi?
Yeah, Vapi.ai, VAPI, voice API.ai. That's our landing page. You can talk to it directly on the website. Within like a couple of minutes, you can make one yourself. You can clone your voice and call your mom. It made my mom sad because it wouldn't tell her that I loved her. So please also tell your mom that you love her. Other than that, check out our docs and our Discord community too, if you're interested in building with voice.
Yeah, I think all these links will be in the kind of description of the video when we post it. So, I mean, yeah, you can reach.
Cool.
And you personally, are you available on LinkedIn, Twitter? What are the best channels?
Yeah, Twitter is fine. Also available on LinkedIn. Jordan Deersley is my name. On LinkedIn, on Twitter, I don't use it personally, but Vapi_AI is our handle if you want to follow and see what we're coming out with.
Awesome. Cool.
Cool.
Yeah. Thanks, Jordan, for the